the Moses in the Bible and the Moses in the Quran.
How is Moses?
Listen to
Give me
this.
the broad outlines of Moses' story in the Bible and the Quran.
Well, first I would like to say that Moses is the prophet that is mentioned more than any other in the Quran.
Even Muhammad.
Mentioned more than the Prophet Mohammed.
Mention more than the Prophet Mohammed.
Doesn't this make the Muslim religion a copy of the Judaism religion? Isn't Moses a Jew?
But Moses is mentioned throughout the Quran in many different chapters, long narratives about him.
But Moses is mentioned throughout the Quran in many different chapters, long narratives about him.
Okay, let me get this straight, he said. Moses is mentioned all throughout the Quran and in many different chapters. And long narrative, right?
What do you think that is?
Perhaps because Moses is so prominent in Judaism and Christianity, and Islam is showing its affinity with Judaism and Christianity by, in a way, taking possession, if I put it this way, of its main prophet.
Taking possession, if I put it this way, of its main prophet.
You hear that? So Mohammed wants to create a religion and he imitate the Judaism belief and make it his own. You heard correct.
And saying, okay, this Moses that you already know, here is the story about him, told afresh.
How can Mohammed retold a story already been written, even way before he was born?
Told with some subtle differences to bring out the Quran's own theme.
So some Christian had converted to Muslim faith, without even knowing this.
Let's talk about the birth of Moses.
Hear this and let us compare the two stories. Or is this really going to be different from the story in the Bible?
Moses, on whom be peace, is born to an Israelite family.
Let me get this straight. Moses is a Jew. Let's carry on.
At a time when the Israelites were under the domination of the Egyptians, so the Pharaoh lorded it over them. The Quran says that Pharaoh was killing off their sons and doing mischief with their women, with their daughters. And Moses is born in that very difficult circumstances. The mother of Moses, wanting to protect her boy, placed him in a floating vessel of her own devising onto the river Nile, and the waters took him up to the palace of the Pharaoh. The boy is welcomed into the palace of the Pharaoh, adopted as a son, and he grows up there. But eventually he comes to the aid of an Egyptian, of a fellow Israelite, as that Israelite was being clobbered by an Egyptian. So Moses, in defense of the Israelite, punched the Egyptian, and apparently he was more heavy-handed than he realized. The Egyptian died. The next day, a scenario like this occurs again. But before Moses could intervene, he is reminded of what happened the previous day, and he realizes now that the story has broken out, and this could spell a danger for his own life. So he fled. He marries Jethro's daughter, Zipporah. He is now coming back with his family towards the Israelite territory, or to Egyptian territory. There he sees a burning bush, and he goes up out of curiosity, and God speaks to him from the burning bush and tells him to go to Pharaoh and tell him that God wants the Israelite people to be let loose from captivity. He says, I can't speak, I have this impediment, so send Aaron along with me, because he's a better speaker. So God commissions Aaron to go along with him as the spokesman. They go to Pharaoh, they deliver God's message. Pharaoh refuses to let the people go, but they perform one sign after another from God.
Let me just pause here for a bit. I can hear some slight or subtle changes, and still could be relevant to what actually happened.
having detrimental effects for Pharaoh and his people, in the hope that Pharaoh's heart would soften, but rather his heart seems to harden with each one of these signs. Sometimes he wavers for a moment, but then he quickly picks himself up and reasserts himself with more pride than before. Eventually, God sends the plague of death, which afflicts Pharaoh's own house. His firstborn son dies. And this is when, in that moment of grief, he is humbled enough to let Moses go with his people. But he quickly changes his mind.
Let me pause again, still subtle, but relevant to the story in the Bible.
Moses and the Israelites are marching away from Egypt and from that bondage. Pharaoh and his army pursues them, but God inspires Moses to strike the water ahead of them, which would be the water of the Red Sea. The Red Sea parts, and Moses and his people are able to walk through the water upon dry land, safely ashore on to the other side. Whereas the Pharaoh and his army pursuing them are surprised to see the water coming back together and drowning them. And so God saved the Israelite people from under the domination of the Pharaoh. They wander in the desert of the Sinai Peninsula for some 40 years or so. Eventually they reach the land which God had promised them, but Moses dies before they could actually enter that promised land.
Mm-hmm. So it seems from this story that, you know, the narrative in the Bible and the narrative in the Quran are very, very similar.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know about you, but that is enough for me. The Bible is true. So, if you watch the full video, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more simple review.